apartment building, 2 buildings behind me was on fire.
That's not good.
Yeah, I think it was only.
Hopefully, everyone got out okay.
Yeah, I think I would have heard about it.
So, welcome to the lecture for Ancient and Medieval History for Friday, the 10th of September, 2021. You all have your electronics stowed in the shelves or pockets. If you don't, it better be done now. Uniforms seem to be all in order. That's good. And let's see, remember you can clean your areas almost any time with that fluid and those wipes. I'm going to review a little bit just to remind you of where we are. Moses escaped due to his parents' ingenuity and assault by the Egyptians on the firstborn Israelite slaves, the male firstborn Israelite slaves. Pharaoh was trying to destroy a would-be deliverer, and Moses was placed on a river and found by an Egyptian princess, a daughter of Pharaoh, who had just miscarried, and who claimed the boy as her own, calling him Moses, meaning gift of the river. Moses was raised the most educated Jew in history up to that point. He learns letters, numbers, literature, the rites of the temple, theology, architecture, math, what passed for science, military affairs, economics, and government administration. Moses is trained to be a royal Egyptian, capable of doing all the tasks of leadership required. As an adult, he discovered his true heritage, and he killed an Egyptian overseer to save a Hebrew's life. During the trial, his identity was revealed, and he was exiled from Egypt, the land of denial, into Sinai, where he was expected to die. He did not die. He survived in the wilderness, arriving in Midian, where he became the son of a sheik there, Jethro, by marrying his daughter, having a couple of kids, dogs. He was pretty happy. Until Joshua, a slave out of Egypt, who was also exiled, or actually who escaped, showed up. Joshua was a stone cutter. Joshua knew Moses, and he basically told Moses, the people need you. You should come back to Egypt and help us. Moses dithered until he saw a sparkle on the side of a holy mountain. He alone went up the mountain and encountered a mystery, a bush consumed by fire that was not being consumed by fire, a bush that was burning, but the wood was not being converted from wood to ash. And this miracle was followed by a voice which Moses heard as the voice of God, saying, "Take off your sandals, you stand on holy ground." Moses kneels, comes forward on his knees. God says, "Moses, I have heard the cries of my people. You will be their deliverer." Which is scary, because no pressure, right? No pressure. God wants you to deliver a hefty group of slaves from the most powerful empire in the known world. No pressure. And Moses, because he's trained as an Egyptian overlord, understands just how powerful Egypt is. So he says, "God, I'm slow. I'm slow of speech." And God says, "You going to trust you, or are you going to trust me? Put yourself into a position in front of people, and I will guide you with what you should say. And if you really need eloquence, your younger brother Aaron will do. He's a good orator. He has a strong voice." Moses asks God, "All the Egyptian gods have names. We've never had a name for you. Not from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Not through all our long time. What should we call you?" Which is a loaded question, because in magic, which was believed in then and is believed in even by people now. If you can name something, you can command it. So asking the name of God is actually a loaded question, because there are people who would try to leverage the name of God into whatever invocation or evocation or summoning or whatever magic they were trying to do. They would try to conjure by the name of the one true God, which is big mojo and giant blasphemy. God doesn't say, I'm Bob the God. No, no. He gives an interesting answer. He says, I am. What some would translate as, I am who am, or I am that am. I exist. Which later Moses, when he's writing the first 5 books of the Old Testament, will write as YWH, because the Hebrew alphabet at the time of Moses had no vowels. YWH, which is passed down to us through oral tradition as Yahweh. Yahweh. In medieval English, Yahweh somehow becomes Jehovah, much as Jupiter in Roman belief becomes Jove. Yahweh becomes Jehovah. To the Arabs, the name that God gives to the prophet Moses is seen as Allah. Allah, the compassionate, Allah, the merciful. It's the same word for I am. One of the things that got Jesus killed was in front of the Jewish priesthood, the Sanhedrin. They basically imply, who do you think you are? Saying the temple will come down, starting a riot with the money changers. And Jesus' answer was, who do you think? I am. And that was blasphemy, because no Jew would ever say those words in the way Jesus did, because what Jesus was doing was claiming the Godhead. So Moses accepts God's commission, which is part of the covenant. God leads and teaches the faithful people of God, learn and obey. Moses obeys. And with Joshua, he goes back to Egypt. He brings his family at first and then sends them away. There's all sorts of complications with that. And the people are told by Aaron that Moses is going to be their deliverer, and it's going to be so great. And like all crowds everywhere, they expect easy answers. You're going to make magic free us? Yay! We love you, Moses. Not exactly. God works through the process of history, so monotheists believe. So Moses has to persuade their owner, the God King, the Pharaoh of Egypt. And the Pharaoh knows him personally. The Pharaoh's pretty gracious not to throw him in jail or execute him as an exiled Egyptian who has returned against the law. Instead, the Pharaoh hears his petition, and Moses says, thus spake the Lord, let my people go. And the Pharaoh says, why? Come on. And Moses stretches out his staff, and it becomes a snake. And the Pharaoh says, I know that trick. Priests, bring forward your staff snakes. And they bring forward 2 snakes. They drop them on the ground, and the staffs become snakes, because the trick is they look like staffs, but what they are is snakes that have been made rigid, and through a series of taps on pressure points, the magicians of Egypt turn these staves into snakes. They, in other words, let the snake go from its paralytic trance. So the Pharaoh thinks he's won. But then Moses' snake eats the other 2 snakes. Now, normally, the kind of snake that becomes a snake staff is not able to eat another snake all in one gulp. Moses' does. So the Pharaoh loses face, but he says no. Then the Pharaoh goes down to the Nile to bless the waters. And while he's there, Moses shouts, thus spake the Lord, let my people go. And the Pharaoh, Moses, you bother me. And he's pouring a libation of Nile water, and the water of the river turns to blood. That's the story. becomes muddy and brown and undrinkable. Now, a series of plagues follow from this. Frogs leave the water and plague the land. Biting insects leave the water and plague the living. If they can't get water from the Nile, they're going to get blood out of people. People get boils. There is hardship because the only water is water stored in limited supplies, in jars, and that isn't enough in the long term for anyone. Egypt is dependent upon the Nile. The land is poisoned. The crops are blighted. There's even from the sky dangerous signs. Plague after plague after plague. Darkness at noon. Fiery hail from the sky. Burning rocks falling everywhere. Now, how does God work through miracles? Monotheists wonder. Well, there are many monotheist Jews, Christians, and Muslims who believe that the miracles are just that. If you watch the 1950s version of the Ten Commandments, you will see these miracles as magic. The magic of the Lord God Almighty, which is better than all other magics, more profound, more strong. But there are other answers. It's entirely possible God works through normal processes. Since He is the Lord that made nature, He can use these things to His advantage. There are many who believe that there was a volcanic eruption southward beyond the cataracts, perhaps in Nubia or Ethiopia, and that this volcanic eruption poisoned the Nile for a time, and that poison arrived in Egypt when Moses cursed the waters. The frogs, the insects, the boils, the famine, the starvation, the blighted crops, all of that are a direct result of the poisoning of the Nile. The fiery hail from the sky, the wind could be blowing from the direction of the volcano. Not that we know anything about smoke being blown hundreds of miles around here. It's a joke. I'm from New York and New England, where forest fires don't rage on for weeks, and where the smoke does not fill the air unless you're right next to the fire. This is weird to me. It still is, and I've lived here since 2014. Yesterday was not pleasant. And yesterday wasn't the worst day we had. If you remember, in August, we had a couple of really bad days of smoke. So the fiery hail could be bits of volcanic material carried on the winds and dropped on Egypt. Everything can follow from a natural explanation. That doesn't make it any less miraculous. It's a question of timing and belief. The Pharaoh is about to weaken and let the people go. Fire from the sky at noon, a darkened sky. Come on, enough. These slaves aren't worth it. Pharaoh's about to let them go. But at this point, a woman shows that women do, in fact, have real power in history. And she tells her husband that he's no man, let alone a pharaoh. Because no man would allow himself to be intimidated into giving up his slaves. No man would allow himself to be bullied by a desert god. And he's not even just a man. He's supposed to be a god as well as a man. The fulcrum between the heavens and the earth is the living God King. Part God, part man. A bit of both, a bit of neither. And he is going to be intimidated by some shepherd's deity? She makes her man feel small. She makes her man feel insignificant, weak. She works her poison, and by the time Moses gets there, the Pharaoh threatens him. Says, if I ever see you again, you're going to die. Just like the firstborn died back in the day. And Moses replies, unfortunately, you've just made the next curse of God out of your own mouth. It won't be me and the firstborn of Israel that will die. It will be the firstborn of Egypt. The firstborn sons of Egypt. Tonight. Moses leaves. That night, the angel of death, according to the book of Exodus, comes to Egypt. And the Pharaoh has a son, his firstborn son. His son is stricken, like so many other Egyptians. In those days, people had a lot of kids because many of them did not survive. That means most every Egyptian family had a firstborn son. At least very many of them did. And if the story is true, there wasn't a family in Egypt or a person in Egypt that wasn't personally affected by it. In the middle of the night, the wee hours of the morning, Pharaoh calls Moses and says, "Go, take your your flocks, your gear, take booty from Egypt, I don't care. Take your misbegotten people and leave. Before you do, can you do anything for my boy?" Moses says, "I'm so sorry, I can't." And he leaves. And the next morning, the standards of the 12 tribes of Israel are raised near the eastern gate of Goshen, and the people gather with much gold from Egypt and their flocks and whatever property they can drag or carry or cart, and they begin to move slowly into the eastern desert. Eventually, Pharaoh changes his mind. His wife may have had something to do with that also. And the Pharaoh decides that these people whose God humiliated Egypt are not going to get away scot-free. So he organizes his chariots, an army of charioteers. A chariot is a small cart. In Egypt, it was a two-wheeled cart. And that cart had a driver who commanded the horses and a weaponeer who had throwing spears and lances. Chariots were used instead of cavalry because the horses in Egypt were simply too small to bear an armed and armored man into battle. Only when horses got bigger were chariots replaced by horse cavalry. So Pharaoh moves east, and he finds the Hebrews camped with their backs to the sea. This is going to be a slaughter. However, when the Pharaoh's charioteers advance into or towards the Israelite camp, they are blocked, so the story goes, by a pillar of fire that prevents their advance. In the meantime, Moses raises his staff and his arms at the edge of the sea, and the sea waters split, and the Israelites retreat through that opening, crossing the floor of the sea and arriving safely on the other side. Moses crosses. Pharaoh's army is finally free of the pillar of fire and pursues the Hebrews into the trench of water. And as the last Hebrew comes up out of the seabed, as the chariots are getting closer, the sea crashes down and drowns them all. Pharaoh alone survives. He had sent his chariots out, he didn't lead them, and he returns to Egypt a broken man. Now, it all could have happened just that way. Most translations say that the Hebrews were camped here against the Red Sea, and that the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, which is a significant body of water. In Prince of Egypt, you even see the Hebrews walking along the seafloor, and there are whales swimming by. You can see their shadows, which is a neat touch. However, God could also work through much more natural processes. There is an area along the north coast of Egypt, which is a more direct route to Israel. Out here, the swampland is a tidal flat called the Reed Sea, or the Sea of Reeds. Now, what that means is at high tide, the area is flooded, and at low tide, the area is mudflat. Is it possible? Many scholars believe it is. That it was the Sea of Reeds that Moses was backed up against. That Moses ordered the Israelites in as the tide lowered. They crossed at the peak of low tide, and they got out of the area by the time the tide returned. It is possible that the Pharaonic army was stopped. Was it stopped at a geographical choke point? Did the Jews build a fire? Was there a dust devil? Was there a Scirocco or a tornado? Was there a meteor strike? We don't know. But the Pharaoh's army could very well have had to be delayed, and then only after the Jews had mostly crossed, the Pharaoh's army would enter the Sea of Reeds and be captured by the rising tide and drown. Either is possible. Does one negate the hand of God? Depends on how you see the hand of God. So the Jews move into the wilderness of Sinai. They're out of Egypt. And as they wander in the wilderness, they have trouble feeding and getting water for themselves and their crops. There are miracles where Moses splits a rock that seems to be utterly dry, and that rock suddenly has water pouring forth. Manna arrives from heaven every morning, which is a variant of dew in a special plant that is edible and provides the Jews with sustenance. But eventually the Jews wander to God's holy mountain. We don't know exactly where that is. It could be in western Arabia. It could be in Sinai. All of this is wilderness around Median. There comes a point where God reveals to Moses his 10 Commandments. I am the Lord your God, you shall have no false gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thyself any graven image. Keep holy the Sabbath day. Honor thy father and thy mother. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against their neighbor. That means thou shalt not lie. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods or thy neighbor's wife. These commandments, and there are actually 14 discrete commandments in the Decalogue, the 10 words of God. Roman Catholics interpret them one way, Jews interpret them another way, Protestant Christians interpret them a third way. They group them into different groups of 10 commandments. For example, Catholics don't make yourself a graven image as a second commandment. They fold that into the first commandment. It's just a question of which set of 10 you learn. And the people agreed to follow God's laws. And Moses says, to commemorate this, I'm going to go to the holy mountain with Joshua. And when I return, the hand of God will have carved these laws into the stone as the word of God has been carved into our hearts. Moses climbs the holy mountain with Joshua. There is a vast amount of time. The Bible, whenever it's dealing with something that's a month to a few months long, says 40 days. 40 days. 40 days and 40 nights. So Moses is gone for proverbial 40 days on the mountain. And the people get restless. Remember, many of the people resent the fact that Moses made trouble for them because the Egyptians punished the Hebrews during the plagues. Many people do not believe that freedom involves accepting a bunch of laws sent by God according to Moses. They think freedom is freedom. To be licentious, to be lusty, to steal, to bully. Anarchy, not freedom. That's what they think. And so this faction persuades the camp of Hebrews to reject Moses because he's not coming back. If he had come back, if he was going to come back, he would have come back already. He's been gone too long. And if we're going to reject Moses, what are we going to do? Let's go back to Egypt. In Egypt, we had food. In Egypt, we had jobs. Now the Egyptians will respect us because of all the strength that was shown by the God. Don't try to figure it out. It's not very logical. But the Egyptians won't accept us because they don't like our God, because our God hurt them. What if we bring an Egyptian God before us? A new God, but an Egyptian-style God. Gather up the gold and the gems, the silver, and the precious things. Aaron, Moses' brother, is bullied by the mob into making a golden calf. An Egyptian-style god. And the Jews have orgies in front of it, and they sacrifice to it, and it's a pretty nasty time. Meanwhile, Moses is on the mountain. Now, there are those who believe that Joshua waited down near the bottom of the mountain, that Moses went up to the area of the burning bush by himself and even beyond, and that with God's fiery finger, the words, the 10 words of God, the 10 commandments, the Decalogue, is carved into the living rock of the mountainside. And then God's fiery finger makes that rock separate, and now there are tablets, stone tablets with the law written on them forevermore. Could have happened though. It's a question of faith. It's also possible that you might put together the notion that Moses is going up a mountain with a stone cutter. Is it any less the word of God? If God inspires Moses to tell Joshua what to carve into the stone, Joshua carves it into the stone, separates the stone from the mountain. In other words, the 10 Commandments are written with God's breath in our hearts and minds, not necessarily in some kind of magic show with the cliff. It's a question of faith. Moses comes down the mountain, meets Joshua, hears the tumult of the worship of the golden calf, and becomes very angry. Now, there is a moment where Moses is seen by the camp, and the expression, the horns of God are on him. Now, this expression is so clear that when the great sculptor of the Renaissance, Michelangelo, carves his statue of Moses, he puts horns on him, like goat horns, because that's what the Bible said. Is it possible that, the Bible is clear in saying that whenever God and Moses interact, Moses ages prematurely. So Moses looks like a healthy 60 or 70-year-old by this point, even though he's probably 30 or 40. Moses, though, might not have actual horns, because there are expressions in the Hebrew that refer to sun rays. In other words, you're on a day where there's a lot of clouds and there's a lot of sun, and there seem to be like beams of sunlight coming from the heavens, one of those days. And if you occlude the sun, if you block the sun out from the perspective of the people looking up at you, depending upon the clouds and the light, it could look like there are lights, shining lights like laser beams, like horns, the horns of God, and that it might have been those. In any event, Moses shouts down at the people, and he doesn't stutter this time. You have been freed from Egypt by the hand of God, and you bite the hand that feeds you. You have been saved again and again by miracles of God, and yet you still don't believe. You promised to follow the 10 Commandments, which are carved here by God for us to remember forevermore, and you worship a calf of gold, a work of man. You are not worthy of these 10 commandments, you cursed generation. Now, those of you that want to apologize to God and come back, get over here. Those of you that don't, stay where you are. And the Hebrews split. The story goes, Moses takes the tablets, wings them at the unfaithful, and as the tablets hit, the ground literally opens up and swallows them. They are taken into the nether regions of the earth alive, as if a giant earthquake just went. The rest of the people of the camp are going to wander for a lifetime in the wilderness because God is punishing them. There comes a point in the wanderings where Moses has to sentence people to death for violating the Sabbath. The Sabbath is Saturday. From sunset Friday to sunset Saturday is the holy day of the Jews, the day of rest, the Sabbath. It is the last day of the week, and it is a symbol of, in the Genesis creation story, God rested on the seventh day. So people are supposed to rest on the seventh day. If you do work on the seventh day, that's a violation of Sabbath law. And in Moses' time, that was a death penalty. Death by stoning, which is not a great way to die. So Moses gets angry after a while and yells at God. So in the end, everyone who was a part of that camp dies of old age. Their children who grew up in the wilderness are hard. They're not slaves. They were raised in the desert. They were raised without enough water. They're desert tough, and they are psychologically aggressive. These guys have been bred for war by 40 years, again, that indeterminate number, in the wilderness. Even Moses can't enter the promised land. The only member of the older generation is Joshua, because he was on the mountain with Moses. And Joshua becomes their war leader. What are they going to do after 40 years in the wilderness? Well, they sent spies into the land of Canaan. And after the spies, they're going to invade. And in the time of Joshua, by God's grace, they will conquer and make the land of Canaan the land of Israel. This happens about 3,300 years ago. And it does happen historically. Whether the religious miracle stuff happens is another question. But the Hebrews do go into Egypt, and they come out of Egypt a few hundred years later. They wander the wilderness, and then by the time they arrive in the land of Canaan, they're a nation of commandos, ready to kill to establish their rule in God's promised land. Any questions so far? Questions, comments, thoughts? If you have different insights on any of this stuff, you can certainly raise them. Your families or your personal faith may be different than the way I've described it, or your understanding of Scripture, or your understanding of Jewish history, or any of that. I'm always open. I'm often open. I'm usually open to people bringing up alternative interpretations, additional information, that sort of thing. Yes, sir.
So did all the members of the older generation, including Moses, did they die?
Well, Moses had to be left behind.
Yeah.
Moses was left to die alone on Mount Nebo. Basically, he watches the Jews cross the Jordan River and enter the Promised Land. But he's not going with. Now, I will freely admit, my expertise is more on the New Testament. So my understanding is that the older generation, except for Joshua, has passed. That Aaron has passed, and that everyone who was a slave out of Egypt except Joshua has passed. If I could be wrong, there could be a few people, but the general message was you sinned in worshiping the golden calf, you had accepted the 10 Commandments, and you violate them right away, so you get to die in the wilderness. That make sense?
Yeah, and then the new generation.
The new generation comes out of the desert, and they are desert tough, and they are ready to rumble, and they conquer the land of Canaan under Joshua's leadership with the help of the Ark of the Covenant and God and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Famous story of Joshua leading a group of trumpeters, I think it's 7 times around the walls of the city of Jericho, and then the walls collapse. And the Israelites come in, and Jericho is conquered. I see no other questions. Yeah.
So Moses stayed out in the wilderness by his own people or by his own choice?
By God's choice. Moses says, I can't go in. God, because I got angry with him, refused to let me join you in the promised land. Now, the truth is, Moses led the people out of Egypt and through the wilderness. He was the deliverer. But it's a different generation's job, and it's a different person's job to then conquer the land of Canaan for the Israelites. So the way you do this is you don't see Moses dying of a heart attack somewhere. Moses simply stays behind and basically waits for God to take him. Now, this isn't too dissimilar from other important historical or religious figures. In Roman mythology, the founder of Rome is Romulus. And I'll tell you a lot about Romulus in January. But Romulus kills Remus. He establishes Rome. He's the first king of Rome. And at the end of his life, he goes to a hilltop. Rome has 7 hills. And a storm just comes upon that hill. And when the storm passes, Romulus is gone. What Romans believe is that he apotheosized. That means is that Romulus was taken bodily into heaven and became one of Rome's gods. So there's a mystery there. The King Arthur myth. At the end, there probably was a Celtic war leader named Artorius. But Arthur doesn't die. Arthur goes to the island of Avalon, where he's going to wait in sort of some non-life, non-death situation until Britain needs him again, and then he'll return with Excalibur. In some ways, Winston Churchill seems to be a fulfillment of that, but that's just silly thought. In many cases, you have mythical figures or semi-mythical, semi-historical figures who don't die on screen. They are left somewhere, and so there's a mystery about them. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So now Israel has been conquered, and a couple hundred years pass. And a new people arise. Let's see, what shall I use for Israel? Okay. So, basically, this area is the area occupied by the Jews. But then a new people show up, and that new people are people of the sea. They arrive in boats. They arrive on the coasts, and they establish cities like Ashkelon and Gaza. These are the Philistines. The Philistines, around 1,000 years ago, come from the sea, and they drive inland. Just like the Israelites took the land of Canaan from the Canaanites, the Philistines are preparing to take the land of Israel from the Israelites. These Philistine wars have several stories. One story is the story of a Jewish hero named Samson, who's the strongest man, like a Jewish Hercules. But Samson is betrayed by his wife, who knows that God gives Samson his strength through his long flowing hair. So she gives him a buzz cut, and he is weak and captured. But there's a moment after he's been tortured for a while by the Philistines where they have him strapped between 2 pillars in their palace temple, and he realizes his hair is growing back again. And in his last act, he yanks the pillars in, causing the building to collapse on him and on the Philistines. One story. The more historically important and famous story, in the time of King Saul, the Israelites are hard-pressed by the Philistines. By the way, the word Palestinian is used by a group of Arabs who settled in the Holy Land in the 7 and 800s AD. It comes from Philistine. The belief is that the Arab conquerors blended in with the local non-Jewish population, and that the Philistines and the Arabs have been therefore the Philistines and the Israelites have therefore been fighting over this same patch of land for 3,000 years. And there is some justification for seeing things this way. So, there's going to be a great battle in a valley. On one side of the valley and some hills is Saul and his Israelite army. On the other side of the valley are the Philistines and their army. King Saul realizes the Philistines have a more powerful force, but he's a tough fighter, the Jews are tough fighters, and he believes God's on his side. And then, out of the desert comes the prophet, the holy prophet of God, who says, "People of God, we have a God-given solution." Saul doesn't like the prophet. I think it's the prophet Isaiah. Saul is annoyed by this guy. This guy is so impractical. Saul says, "I have a battle plan all drawn up, but fine. Let's hear your plan, Mr. Prophet." The prophet says, "It's not my plan, it's God's plan." "Of course it is, prophet. What's the plan?" "Well, instead of fighting a battle, God wants us to handle this with champions. One of theirs, one of ours, fight it out. Winner takes the field. Loser goes home with their tail between their legs." Saul says, "Oh, that's great. Why would they accept that? They have an advantage over us right now. Why would they accept a battle of champions when they could just defeat us in normal battle? You know what? Fine. God will. Go ahead. Messenger, go to the Philistines. Tell them that this is the proposal, that we have champions fight." So the messenger goes off. "Okay," Saul says, "who to choose? Which of my bad-bottomed commandos am I going to pick for this?" And prophet taps him on the shoulder and says, "No, Your Majesty, you don't understand. God has already picked the champion." "Really? Who's the champion? Who's got picked?" "You see this little shepherd boy here? 13, 14 years old." "Yes." "That's the guy. He doesn't know how to fight. He's got a sling. He handles sheep. Ah! If I kill him, the army will get angry at me because the army believes this guy's a prophet of God. I think he's a nut job. Fine, if the Philistines agree. Go ahead. Send the boy in. You okay with this, boy? You know what's going to happen, don't you?" And the boy says, "I trust in the Lord." "Of course you do." Meanwhile, the messenger comes back and gives the strange tale that the Philistines accept a contest of champions. And then they started laughing as we went away. They've got something up their sleeve. So it comes time, and David, the shepherd boy, walks out from behind the Israelite lines and down into the valley. The Palestinian armies part like the orcs before the Balrog in Moria in Lord of the Rings. And there's this mountain of a man, this mountain of a muscle, this Goliath in full body armor. Goliath, chief wrestler among the Philistines. Goliath, a giant among men. Ha 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 ha. The earth practically shakes under every one of Goliath's footsteps. King Saul, the shepherd boy, is scared because no one's going to protect him now. He's here. God wanted him here. But this guy outweighs him 3 or 4 pounds to 1 of his. He's got armor. David's wearing a tunic with sandals. But there's a moment as Goliath gets closer. Everyone's laughing. And Michelangelo tries to capture this moment in his great statue of David. Moment where David decides to fight. and he's going to fight in the only way he knows how. He picks up a good stone, puts it in a sling, shoots the stone. The stone hits Goliath right between the eyes, under his helmet, and basically penetrates his forehead. Boom! Down goes Goliath! Down goes Goliath! You could hear a pin drop because no one can believe their eyes. The Philistines can't believe their... Talk about a lucky shot! One shot, one kill, David. Well, the Philistines leave the field. What the hell happened? And within a few years, Saul is gone, and David is now king of the Jews. And during David's time, Israel actually becomes an imperial power. David's Israel spreads power into the Sinai and up even into Syria. Under King David, Israel is a conquering nation. That doesn't happen again until Israel kicks Arab butt in the Arab-Israeli wars of the 20th century. So it's pretty unusual. David rules. He's a godly king, sort of. But David has a son. His son is King Solomon. Solomon is not like David. He's not as much of a warrior. But he's reputed to be very wise, and he's the richest king of Israel. There's a rumor that a black queen of Sheba comes up from the Horn of Africa, and they have a torrid love affair. Here's an example of Solomon's proverbial wisdom. One day, he's holding court, because kings are judges. People bring their problems to him. And he solves a case, and he says, next case, and his lector, boom, next case! And from the hallway he hears, and these two women are practically clawing at one another. Silence! Boom! Solomon from his throne says, one at a time, explain the problem. You first. Well, you see, Your Majesty, I'd hate to bother you, but this woman has stolen my baby! I had the baby, and she stole it! She stole it from me! And the other woman starts, no, she stole my baby! I just took it back! It's my baby! It's my baby! Boom! Silence! I see the problem. I see why you can't agree to disagree. Lecter, take the baby, put it right here on the table. Such a cute little baby. Okay. Swordsman. She gets the left half, she gets the right half. Do it. One of the women is awesome, just dumbstruck. The other woman goes, wait. No, I'm wrong. I was bad for her. It's her baby. Give it to her. Don't touch us. Don't touch her. Don't harm the baby. Throw me in jail. Throw me in a pit. Throw me in a pit with vipers. Do whatever you need to do, but give her the baby. At which point Solomon says, lady, it's your kid. Why? Can anyone tell me why? Why does Solomon... Yeah.
Because the mom feels so much love for her child that she doesn't want it to die and will rather her life be taken away than her child.
Anything? Yeah. Yeah. She cared more about the baby's well-being than about winning the argument. Now, you have met people in your world who get into arguments so bad that they lose track of everything else. Hopefully, you don't have them arguing while one of them is driving. It's bad. It's not a good way to be. Try not to be that way. Try not to get so into arguing with somebody you lose track of everything else. This woman who wanted the baby's welfare more than to win the argument should be the mother. Solomon really could care less who's the biological mother. Really, it doesn't matter. What matters is who will be a good mother to this child going forward. And it will be the mother who cares more about the child than she does about herself. That's the wisdom of Solomon. And that's where we're going to leave things today. Thank you. Any other questions, comments, or thoughts? Okay, thank you for your attention. Now, on the syllabus, it says, what about this week? Where are your syllabus again? Last week this Monday you were supposed to have short essays. We delayed that. You do not have to do creation myth briefing. We'll delay that. I'll talk about both of these things next week. So you do not, once again, have homework for me that's due this coming Monday, but you do have the chapter survey coming up, and that is a hard deadline. Any questions about that? If you want, you can get your electronics returned to your seat. Please don't congregate by the door. Thank you.